right, welcome back, everyone, to Connor Prairie's newest one and only podcast, Beyond the Revolution. I'm Easton.
And I'm Ryan.
And we have two very special guests here making their podcast debuts. Would y'all like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Abby. I'm the manager of collections and registration here at Connor Prairie.
Welcome, Abby. It's a pleasure.
I'm Henry, and I'm a historic trades specialist, and I'm a carpenter and historic preservationist here at Connor Prairie.
So you live outside. Who let you in here today, Henry?
So our second theme for how we're celebrating or commemorating America 250 at Connor Prairie is the building of community. It's that step right after founding, right? What comes next? How do we take this big idea of a country founded in these like big democratic ideals and make it work on the ground? How do we build literally community with one another to make this work? Knowing what we do well here at Connor Prairie, I always want to stay in our lane. How do we talk about this story? And my mind immediately turned into, those physical spaces and objects that we build, right? Our houses, our schools, our community centers, our material culture that we make inform our unique American identity, our craftsmanship, our tools, etc. And then what are those choices in taking those things that we make and then preserving them for the future, right? And so for this conversation, I've been wanting to have it for a long time. In fact, it's one of the reasons why I really wanted this to be one of the themes, is so that we could pair these two things together. But as always, we always have the perfect people on the mic to have this conversation, Henry and Abby. And my first question to sort of get to know you guys is, if someone were to come to Connor Prairie, where might they find you and where might they find your work, knowing it might not be in the same place?
Sure. Usually outdoors.
Always.
But if you visit while we're open during the summer, you can usually see me in our historic reconstructed cabinet maker's shop, where we have reproduction and original 19th century tools that we use to recreate processes and products of a similar shop in the period. But because that shop is the only wood shop we have, my work includes not just cabinet making and furniture, but also architectural components like doors and windows, repairs to wagons and wheelbarrows, barrels, buckets, agricultural tools, domestic tools of all kinds. And so the things that I make and fix day to day in front of our guests are all over Connor Prairie's property.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I generally work in our brand new conservation studio here at Connor Prairie. We reopened it when we opened the new building. Kind of a new experience, having it be a sort of window into collections care and management, so guests can kind of see where I'd be working with the objects. But I also work a lot in my office doing paperwork for our objects. It's a lot of what I do. And then also working in our vault with those objects that we have in storage. So you can kind of see me in any of those three places.
Mm-hmm. And where do we have objects on the grounds?
Oh, we have objects in almost every single historic building. The historic buildings themselves are also objects that are managed kind of collectively among both of our departments. Again, I do most of the paperwork for them, and they do a lot of the hands-on work. And so you'll find objects pretty much almost everywhere you look at Connor Prairie.
Awesome. And something that is not necessarily unique to Connor Prairie, but it still blows me away every time I see you guys doing. A lot of the work that you do is to the time period, right? You try and do the craftsmanship that would be accurate to, in this case, the 1830s, right?
As much as possible. Yeah. Everything from the glue we use to the finish to, I like to start with wood that's been processed with similar machinery, even if it's powered a little differently.
And this may be a stupid question, but does that take a lot more time?
It really depends. It depends. If you're making one thing from start to finish with hand tools, it doesn't necessarily take so much longer than you would expect compared to power tools. Power tools are much more efficient if you're making 100 or 1,000 of one thing, making the same pieces over and over and over. But if you have the right tools, if you have a foundation of skill and practice using those tools, then it goes a lot faster than I expected when I started learning, and much more so than our guests usually expect.
Can you give me an example of?
Oh, sure. Well,
actually, can you give me an example of one that like probably took too long? Something that would have been way easier if you had done it. It's sort of like, you know, on a CNC router, just like let it go.
I'm sure I can, and it's difficult because the handwork is only half the job. When I'm in that shop, when I'm in our modern shop, I can focus on producing or repairing an object. When we're working on buildings and on the grounds, we can work as efficiently as we can. When I'm in front of guests, conversations happen, and sometimes those conversations take me away from the project at hand, and sometimes those conversations go much deeper into the project at hand. So things often take a lot longer than they need to. Because I'm talking to people, I might measure something 6 times before writing it down.
Right. Yeah.
But just in the amount of handwork that goes into something and the time spent on that. Let me see. In any instance, like in the case of a wheelbarrow that we built a couple years ago, most of the frame was joinery and shaping that was familiar to me, but then it has a wheel on it. And I didn't know anything about that. So that took much, much longer than it necessarily needed to, just because I had to teach myself how to rebuild a wheel. Mm-hmm. And I had to learn along with the blacksmiths, because there's a lot of metal parts in the wheel. So there was back and forth between the shops. There was experimentation and mistakes that were made, and tools that had to be researched or invented in order to get there. So
wow, make your own tools. Very
absolutely,
convenient, though.
absolutely.
Don't have to
Well,
wait for it.
that's a huge part of handwork, of hand tool woodworking, of traditional working in most trades, is making your own tools. Not necessarily making all of your tools, but that's a huge part. And that can make something take longer. If I'm building something for the first time and I have to make a lot of new tools, then that'll slow a project down.
I want to say one thing, because making your own tools reminded me of something, and we love space on the podcast. We talk about it sometimes.
We do.
That's still something that goes on today. In fact, on the ISS, they sent up a 3D printer so that they could just print their own tools when they needed it. So it's always been this thing. It's just like, oh, I don't have this thing to build, so let's create something. When you're going around Prairie Town and you see some of these things that you spent so much time on and created, how does that feel?
It feels really special. I've been here for 5 years, and we've spent most of those 5 years behind the scenes doing some pretty intense repairs and reconstruction on the buildings. So there have been projects like the wheelbarrow that I get to watch people use. There are windows that I've installed that people look through and never think about. And that's really fun to think about. But I can see a lot of things that my hands have been on, whether it was with others or on my own. And it's really special to be surrounded by things that you've built. I imagine we have a popular image that borders on myth of the American pioneer or farmer who built his homestead from the ground up. But the fact is that's a very universal rural American experience, and not exclusively rural, to build your life around you. And I get to experience a little bit of that throughout Prairie Town. I get to look at all the buildings and see the things that I've fixed and built and made. It is really fulfilling.
Yeah, no, and that's something that's pretty amazing about something like Conner Prairie, because today, like, I'm personally so far removed from anything like that. Having that kind of pride in something that I'm creating. I know I create videos, and that's like the closest thing that I have approximation, but like physically knowing that the roof over your head is going to be there because you personally saw to it or not is something that is not really thought about for a lot of people today. But for so much of our history as a country, it would have been, which it's really cool to have that perspective be available, especially as we eventually will get on to talking about what do we do to preserve things? Why are we preserving things? What does it matter? But I wanted to jump back to something that you said earlier. You get to be out on the grounds. You get to have these conversations with people all the time. And I'm sure some of it is like, oh, well, how do you do that? And it's a very, very practical, like, how you put something together. But the thing that I always appreciate having conversations with you is you always kind of take it a step deeper, and you're able to do that through something, just the physical objects that you're working with. And I'm gonna again ask for an example. So be thinking of just like, what are some of those conversations that you look back on? You're like, wow, it's kind of amazing that I've been able to have that conversation when really it started off with, this just thing I'm making.
These are all really hard to come up with examples for, because that's true for every single thing that we do. Mm-hmm. And a lot of time it comes from the guest. So there's always somewhere in Prairie Town I can take, and I can connect it to some of the stories that we tell. I can connect it to the skills that we practice. If I am building a kitchen tool, like a mold for pressing cheese, and we start talking about food preservation and food preparation, and that connects people to memories and anecdotes of their own, and they start telling me stories. And then we both wind up going so much deeper together over that object that started out with, what is that thing that you're doing? And I start saying, well, I have to do it this way because this is how it's going to be used. And so it has to be built this way. And how do we know that it's going to be used this way? So like I said, it's really hard to come up with an example. But
well, and I imagine a lot of people come with, oh, this reminds me of this thing I've made personally, and now I want to share that with you. Do you have any examples of that?
Let's see.
I get a lot of that in my work too. I guess it's kind of different perspective, but just like objects out, and then people will be like, oh, my grandma used to have that, my mom used to have that, I used to see that in this house, in this context, and so why is it in this place, in this context too? It's definitely kind of universal, like wanting to share that aspect.
It comes out a lot of ways people associate things with not just their family, but even previous generations. Mm-hmm. I've built a lot of boxes and chests, and whenever I'm building a chest, people ask me if it's a cedar chest, which is really interesting because it's never made out of cedar. But when people say that, that's a cultural touchstone that they remember their parents having chests made out of cedar. And then that leads to the question, why do you build a chest out of cedar? Why would you build it out of something other than cedar? Mm-hmm. And that takes it right back to, where do I get my wood from, and why is this wood better than the other? But it most of the time, it's that kind of connection. Somebody will say, I remember my grandmother or my aunt doing that food preservation, or I remember my grandpa. That's the most common one. It's less so the things I make, but the tools that I use. People say my father, my grandfather, my uncle, whoever had those planes, had planes like that. That's a tool that is not commonly used anymore. People aren't familiar with it in context the way that we get to be here, but they're
familiar with the tool itself, and then they get to see how it was used.
It's in their attic. It's in their garage. It's in their barn. They may say that they know their grandfather used it to make all sorts of things. So that's what these objects are. They're connections.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask this question because I've always wondered, is there a modern, like, equivalent to a plane? Because you don't see people using planes anymore.
There are modern planes, absolutely, okay. And they're still used. It depends. You said something a few minutes ago, which was that people still make their own tools in different industries.
Yeah,
absolutely. I exist more in the woodworking hobby world, than the professional woodworking world, outside of Conner Prairie, and so in that world, buying most of your tools, outside of making special fixtures or jigs, buying most of your tools is much more common than making them. But in specialized industries, like you brought up, working in space, Or
Because you
people-
can't just
peop-
ship
right.
them a tool.
People who work on boats, the ancestors of astronauts in a lot of ways, and also who still work on boats today. There are so many industries, machinists, mechanics, manufacturers who make their own tools. So again, there are absolutely modern planes. They don't look the same, so they don't trigger that connection the same way to people. It's the ones made of wood
Right.
that make people nostalgic. But the metal ones, plenty of people still have in their garage, and they've used it to trim a door that sticks. Or if they are cabinet makers, furniture makers, carpenters, they've used it to fit, trim, or finish a house or whatever. So most of these things still exist in some way, shape, or form, and that is another really great thing to be able to connect people back around through their own experiences to the thing in front of us.
Right. Yeah. Another kind of pointed question, but when you're doing your work on the grounds, does everything that you make have a purpose? And are you aware of said purpose when you're making it?
Always. Yeah. On occasion, we make things that we'll send to the gift shop, or we have craft markets and other events sometimes where we'll put things out for sale. And often I get to get creative with what I'm making or how I make it in those instances. But outside of that, most of the things that we build, even setting aside buildings where in most cases we're the ones who either identified the problem that means we need to build a new window, or we need to make a new handrail, or if the interpreters identify that problem and it gets brought up to my supervisor, or it gets sent through collections and it comes to us. In most cases, there's a process that means we know exactly why that thing is needed, and we've worked together with collections and with curatorial to determine what that thing should look like, how it should be produced, what are our expectations for producing it. And so there's a lot of purpose. There's a lot of intention. There's a lot of preparation behind most of the work that we do out there.
And we're going to have to cut this because I had a question. I completely forgot it. Now it's, so it has a purpose. Oh, and would that be similar to like a craftsman in the 1830s?
Absolutely. We enjoy as collectors and students of artifacts those odd little things that seem to have been made for no reason or just for fun.
Because that tells you even kind of more about more about a people in general, I guess. Yeah,
absolutely. So those things are out there, but there were industries making things on speculation in hopes to sell them. Those were larger industries. Those are very different operations, and they're much more familiar to manufacturing today, but those were all centralized in urban centers for the most part. Or that's not really the story we're telling in Prairie Town, which is a much broader rural American experience, and everything you're making is made because somebody needs it in most cases. And if you're getting paid for it, it's usually being made because somebody
Right.
needs it. That's your living. So it is really similar.
Well, sorry, makes me curious. Abby, have you encountered like any objects like he was describing in the collection?
Of like objects that don't seem to
That
have
don't
any
seem to have any
purpose.
purpose? Like, this is a latch of some kind.
Sometimes I feel like a lot of times if I don't know it, I attribute it to ignorance on my part, just not being as familiar with the uses of the tools of the time period, just because I am still relatively new to this aspect. But I'm sure that there will be something that, try as we might not be able to figure out what it was used for or why it was being used. But that's kind of par for the course for a lot of museums too, is that like I mean, even in my history degree, knowing that there are so many aspects and objects that we could never have the context enough to figure out what it was used for, and whether it was just for decoration, which is its own thing, or if it was used for like an actual purpose. But I'm sure there are thousands of lost stories and purposes of these tools that we might never recover.
But that is part of the story, though.
Yeah.
The absence is part of the story.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure you get this in a lot of your work. You look at an object that may be practical, but you're like, why would they even do it in this way, maybe? And there's those stories, too, that are lost that you are now having to kind of go back. I mean, also you, but go back and try and figure out why they did it this way because you're recreating it.
That's actually one of the biggest points of collaboration between our departments because a lot of what I work on are reproductions from the last 50 years. So when I look at something that somebody did in 1985 and I ask myself, why did they do it that way? My first question is, was it done that way historically? And the only way to know is to go look at the thing that they copied, which is cared for by our collections department. So there's a lot of those mysteries. And unfortunately, sometimes it's something that somebody did for some reason in the 20th century. But when that odd thing that we observe is present in the original, it gets a lot more interesting. Now, sometimes we look at the original and there's so many more strange, odd details to it because the person doing it in 1986 did it in a way that was more familiar to us. But the person who did it 200 years ago was working in a different context and they knew things we don't know. So usually those mysteries come up on the original objects, but that's the first question we'll answer is this appropriate to the period, or is this a 20th century, I won't say mistake, but alteration.
Right. And those stories are always really interesting because it's not like a family history or it's not anything. It's something that you can really only tell from closely looking at the object, and also someone who kind of knows what they're doing. But so many of the objects in our collection also have those, meaningful stories. And before I get down into that line, I do want to ask, Henry, do you make anything that you give out as gifts to people?
Those are my favorite things to make.
Okay.
And mostly I make those on my own time.
Right.
I love making things for either my family, or my absolute favorite thing to make any day is going to be something that someone else who practices some hand skill is going to use. I've given so many people even silly little things that they're going to use in their craft or in their practice somehow. I've made initial stamps for potters to put on the bottom of their things. I've made so many things like needle holders and other things for people who work with textiles. And the reason they're my favorite thing to make is because, like things that wind up in our collection because somebody said this belonged to and was used by this person to do this thing that we don't see people doing anymore. Those things, I hope someday will have that kind of connection, that it was handmade by whoever and it was used in the hands of somebody else to do something equally unique.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Well, next year, if I'm still in costume for drumming, I'll have to see if we can do some actual historic handmade drumsticks for that.
Proper
That would be
drumsticks.
Really interesting. And something that also is, it's another thing that kind of is unique is, so we have these things that we preserve, but also what you were just saying, you're creating things that you hope are also used as opposed to put up on a shelf. Why is that distinction better? Or why is that, more important to you, that the thing that you give is actually used?
Well, because ultimately we make things like this because we're fascinated by the things that have been used. That you can't fake the wear from the hands of somebody who handles something. And when you talk about that kind of personal connection, if I pick up a woodworking plane from the early 19th century and it's worn down and burnished, polished smooth by the hands that held it and used it, it is so hard to fake that.
Yeah.
Right.
So those old things, they're anything I make is never going to look anything like that when I make it new. And I just dream that someday it'll look like the things that I was looking at when I made it.
Yeah, I was just thinking we have, I pulled out recently a darning egg that a lot of people think looks like a maraca. And it's like a thing that you put socks on to sew holes, and it's an antique, and it's painted black, and the top part is all chipped and flaked away, and you can like see where the needle has kind of pushed into it. And I've stared at it thinking just like, whose grandma or whose mom was like so carefully stitching their child's socks on here, or like their own socks, or what was causing the run in those socks? Like, what were they doing that was causing that? And it's just like something as simple as chipped paint on a darning egg just like feels such like a meaningful connection to that past.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah. You could have given me probably 10 guesses and I would have not been able to guess what a darning egg is.
Every
I'm
time I
still
bring
not
it
sure
out,
I know what it does.
It is just a smooth, supposed to be smooth, like maraca shaped thing. You hold the handle, you stretch the sock over it, and you use it to have a stretched out place for you to sew up holes in your socks.
I know that's something I love about our collections policy, collections plan, whatever, is we collect so many tools, so many not just handmade objects, but objects that are used to make things. And when having conversations with your supervisor, Nathan, about, well, doesn't it hurt the tool to use it? And he's like, yeah, but that's the point of the tool. And there's so many objects in our collection, musical instruments, they have a purpose, and they don't often get used for it if they're sitting up on a shelf. And at Conner Prairie, we kind of have the best of both worlds, where we have some of the originals preserved, but also we are taking out, some in our educational resource collection or our reproduction and actually using them the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, there was I think a couple of classes that I took during my graduate degree of just like, how do we walk that line between preservation and preserving what that object was used for? And just thinking about so many different museums have so many different philosophies about it, and like we use the term best practices for how to preserve it, but at the same time not all of us have the same idea of what's best for the object and how best to use it in a historical context. And it's sad to see things put on a shelf, but at the same time, if some things weren't put on a shelf, then we might not be able to see it. So it's like that really hard line to walk.
That will come up again in such a big way. You mentioned we were going to talk later about why we all do what we do. That's right at the core.
Well, and you couldn't do the work that you do without at least having a reproduction.
Exactly. Yeah, right. It is not the same to use. For instance, I mentioned there are modern planes. They're made out of cast iron. They have different systems of adjusting the blade so that they'll cut properly. They're a different weight. You can't reproduce the experience of making something the way it was originally made completely without a tool that feels the same. But then that raises the question for us, outside of the ethics of using original tools. What about a tool that's worn out? Not that carpenters in the early 19th century didn't have 18th century tools that were well worn and well loved, but they also had brand new early 19th century tools. And that's another area, as with any of our other collection items, not just tools, but furniture, toys, clothing, where if we were to brutally press into service the original artifact and put it through a recreation of daily life and activity, we would actually be experiencing almost a impoverished secondhand sort of experience. And there was thrift and there was reuse in the period, certainly, but carpenters relied on certain tools that needed to be in good condition, and they would just as soon discard an old one if they could afford a new one. So making reproductions also enables us to experience what is it like using a woodworking plane when it's not worn out, when the blade isn't worn down and sharpened incorrectly, when the wedge does fit to hold the blade in place, and when the bottom is flat and everything works as it should. And then we get to explore a different aspect of the nature of these things, other than only looking at them as beautifully worn, decrepit, ancient things.
Right. Yeah. And there's a similar thing whenever you guys put on like new siding to a house.
Yeah.
And it's always like, well, what about the old siding? Well, the old siding looked old. Like these houses were supposed to be built a couple years ago. Like, and also you want to continue to correct that the thing that's important about the house, the bones of the house.
Right.
And you need new siding every so often to protect those like actual, log timbers.
And again, that's in the nature of the object. Siding historically and today is sacrificial. It is there to protect the structure, the frame. So in replacing it, we're not preserving it in stasis, which is the appropriate thing to do with a rare and crucial piece of documentation, an object that is a key to understanding the past. But we're fortunate to have those keys preserved in many parts of the country. We have research that's been written down on them, and our buildings, like so many of our other objects, are being used for a different purpose. So putting new siding on them, as much as we try to preserve any original siding that we still have, is an act of keeping them alive. The same way that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I learned that book conservation involves handling the book in a lot of cases. Because if you never touch it, then if it's a
leather.
You clarify that for me?
Oh, yeah.
It may not be books. It
book
may be true for
preservation,
other
yeah.
types of objects.
Yes. Book conservation, like preserving a book that has been broken, or just like keeping it up?
In the process of handling it in storage and processing, that there's some things you would only want to touch with gloves because you wouldn't want the oils from your hands to damage them further. But there's other things that benefit from being handled.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, you're right. Sorry, my brain was like, read
no,
book
thanks.
binding.
And I don't know anything. Right. I don't know anything about. I know
that
very
is
little
accurate.
about those actual practices. But
Yeah. Well, and also it comes into play too with like our NAGPRA, or just like aspects of NAGPRA, like being able to use those objects in ways that are spiritually significant to their original purpose as well. And so sometimes we sacrifice the preservation aspect in order to upkeep those like spiritual significant. And I say we, just like museums a lot who are working with those NAGPRA partners too. So a lot of times we have to do different things outside of the correct preservation that you would think you have to handle everything with white gloves and stuff, but the actual good upkeep is continuing to use it. And
I was gonna say the Model T is a great example.
Yeah,
Yeah, something
that's
that we're
true.
doing this week.
Yeah, is we're waking it up. We're bringing it out for the season, and in some of the conservation notes that I have of it has to be turned on and driven every so often. Just drive it around the parking lot, or else it's going to deteriorate, because these objects, those cars, were made to be driven. And I've even had some conversations with people at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. They have the same thing. Almost every single car in their collection is operable because they have an entire team of mechanics who are working and servicing those cars constantly, and their hands are constantly in those cars. They're just driving them because they have to be used like that. And just having something sit isn't always the best thing for it.
Yeah. Personally, I have my own collection that is very important to me, and we'll talk about like why collecting is important and why certain things hold value. I mean, you already touched on it, things are more meaningful for you when you make them by hand and then gift them. And then I'm assuming the people on the other side of that probably, imbue hopefully imbue that same meaning. I put a lot of care and effort into a Lego collection I have, and I've quickly learned that this sounds really weird, if you don't play with the Lego, the minifigures get really like stiff. You have to like actually wear down the plastic or they'll tighten up. And it's such a weird thing because you'll see so many people, and this can be, Funko Pops or whatever, they leave it in the box, they stick it on the shelf, but that doesn't actually preserve it in a way that they might think. And it's so fascinating. And so I do want to turn it back a little bit about what you said with our buildings, because it is interesting to think about them, because not only are we, protecting them in that way, we're also talking about purpose. We've completely changed their purpose. Spoiler alert, we don't actually live in these houses.
Ryan.
These houses are
Come on,
not used in the same way someone might use their house.
Right.
Spoiling the magic.
Keep the
I know.
the
as
lore,
much as
keep
it
the
feels
lore
like
up,
it
man.
sometimes,
Yeah.
no, we don't live in there.
And so there does have to be considerations for, safety of guests and
Yes.
like the amount of foot traffic one of these, these houses have. I mean, some of them, like your shop, probably is about the same used as it would have been in the 1830s. Maybe.
Oh boy.
Maybe.
We can talk about this in as much depth as you have time for. But to what you said, absolutely, we are changing the purpose in a lot of cases. We think about traffic flow. We think about accessibility, which sometimes we do have to sacrifice accessibility for the sake of keeping somewhat of the historic character. And we make compromises where we can, because for these buildings, it is so much more important that our guests be able to experience them than that they're locked static in a form that they would exist in a period. But there's a lot of those things, and it's really interesting because it goes both ways. In the instance of the carpenter's shop, it's a modern reconstruction, not an original historic building. It was designed to be ADA compliant. It is built to be accessible in a way that uses a lot of historic techniques, but may or may not be something somewhat unique or rare in a couple of details. And that is so crucial, so that when we build a new building, when we have the opportunity to have control over the design, we make it something accessible. Meanwhile, a lot of our houses have an upstairs with very typical early 19th century staircases that go around tight corners and are very narrow and very steep.
Yeah.
They're not accessible.
Can't even bring a
they're
camera
not
up there, yeah.
They're not safe for our guests. And so we don't use the upstairs. And so our guests can experience the fact that many people in the early 19th century had upstairs with no windows. And that is where many of them slept and where they stored certain things. So we can't share that with our guests, but and on the other side, sometimes we put in new steps, new thresholds, and new porch decks and things like this, and within a short period of time, they have an appearance of wear and age that they would not pick up that quickly,
Right.
Yeah.
maybe in the period, because we have
So much foot traffic.
thousands of feet passing over them, hundreds of thousands of feet
Yeah.
in a couple of days, compared to one family living in them going in and out. So there's so many fascinating nuances of how those buildings are used differently, both in ways that bring us closer to a historical story or experience than keeping that building in its original state. And in some ways, things that exclude parts of those buildings' design or nature or use from the period.
Yeah. And the thing that I appreciate about Conner Prairie, it is really this kind of microcosm that you can map onto maybe larger communities. And what I mean by that is, in any given community, you have those houses that you kind of make the community, right? That they're old, and so often we ascribe meaning to how original it is or whatever, and the community will come together if this house is at risk or whatever. And like at Conner Prairie, we just have them all together in one place. But a lot of these conversations are happening for communities because they think, or they find this thing important. And it is interesting that you bring up like accessibility. So like you can have a historic house, and then what's the point of it if no one can actually visit it? Or if not everyone can visit it, because then that goes against, again, the kind of democratic ideals of the United States. And so with your guys' knowledge of what we do here at Conner Prairie, what do you think communities are thinking when they're looking at these things in their community that they want to preserve? And what does that say about their community?
We're talking about like main historic houses, or just like general objects, or
historic houses. We can start with place, because there's historic downtowns even.
Yeah.
Just what they're thinking. So I've got personal experience growing up with St. Augustine, which is the oldest city in the United States, settled by Spaniards. And there's a historic downtown in that area. There's also the historic Spanish fort. And thinking about how that sort of community has turned into a spring break, beachside vacation / also retirement community. But then it has this weird is a kind of a different word, I guess, a unique historic element that you don't often associate with other beachside kind of like vacation spots like Miami or like Destin. And yet this has been preserved because it's the first of its kind. So that would be a consideration, is just like, what makes this place unique? Is it the first of its kind? Is it the biggest? Is it the most unique? Has it been influenced by a certain historical figure? Has it itself been an influence on the community? There's lots of these questions that a lot of people, I think, consider when thinking about what steps to take for preservation. Another thing to consider is when preservation happens naturally, too, whether through just general neglect. Over time, like, people aren't really going into it, so they're not deteriorating. That can also happen, that things that survive are things that aren't necessarily the best aspects, too.
I didn't even think about that, because, like,
Yeah.
with St. Augustine, obviously, there's some obvious, it's a tourist draw to come visit, and so
Yeah.
there's going to be money put towards it.
Yeah.
But even the just complete lack of it, just leaving it by itself without human interaction, I never really thought about how those are the kind of like the two sides of the coin.
It. Yeah. Well, that's another thing, is that I've got a really good friend who is into spinning, and she made the comment. I was talking about how many spinning wheels we often get asked to take in, and she made the comment. She was like, a lot of those spinning wheels that survived were because they were never used, because they weren't very good.
Oh.
And that the best ones are going to be used until it breaks. And that's not the case for all of them.
Right.
But it is something to consider, too, is that the things that might have survived were the things that weren't the best quality, or the things that people didn't care to preserve. Or didn't care to use. To use.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So you get this like weird dichotomy of just like the best of the best, and then maybe the worst of the worst of these objects. And yet they still might be worth preserving in the long run, because they might, even though if they're not a good representation of what they originally were,
It's what we have
it's
left.
what we have left.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's an incredible point, that there are so many agents of preservation, and many of them are not intentional and not human.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
just because I'm a huge nerd, just thinking about the reason that Pompeii is as
Right.
well preserved as it is now is because of all that volcanic ash. They couldn't have planned that.
Preservation by natural disaster.
Yeah, natural disaster is an actual aspect of preservation.
You mentioned the worst of the worst, and what's one of our biggest sources of archaeological information is privy holes, right? And trash heaps.
Yeah.
And things like that.
Yeah.
Tell us so much that we wouldn't learn otherwise about the mundane.
Yeah.
Nobody bothered to say it because it was so common, but they threw it away,
Yeah.
and there it is.
Yeah. Exactly. It's really interesting to think about, too.
And what you mentioned about neglect, or preservation by neglect, is something that's really, really fascinating to me, because with historic buildings, we talk about preservation through adaptive reuse, which is so crucial. A lot of communities wind up doing that to preserve those precious early buildings. They turn them into an active space, so they can still enjoy the place, they can still use it, and the use of it through commercial use or community use, or even private use, can preserve it where otherwise it might be torn down for
Right.
development. But preservation by neglect is something I witnessed growing up in Indianapolis, because we have so few of our earliest buildings left in downtown Indianapolis. There's less than half a dozen houses or buildings from before 1830, I think, that are still present downtown, but of the somewhat later houses out of our period in Prairie Town, so many of them are still standing because they're in underdeveloped areas of the city, where the people living in them today have never had the money or the means or the opportunity or the time or the skills to replace the wooden windows or redo the siding and paint them or update, in so many ways, old buildings that have fallen out of fashion and the neighborhood around them has changed and the demographics using them, those are the buildings that have the least things torn out and replaced.
Yeah.
Which is such a precarious thing, because at the same time you want for the people living there to have that agency and that ability, that access to preserve their homes.
Yeah.
For all they may or may not care about the historic value, it's their house.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But they may not have the means, and at the same time it makes those of us who care about old buildings worry for the buildings, and that's you know, the meeting point of which I heard in what you were saying earlier, the need for these things in many cases versus the intrinsic value of them.
Right.
How people
And
think about them.
not every place can be Conner Prairie.
No.
There has to be choices made often. You can't take every historic house and make it a historic house
Right.
museum.
Yeah.
And not every historic house should be a museum, which is something personally I've had to come I've personally grappled with that, because I originally was like, yeah, just make everything a museum, and then visited a lot of museums, and I'm just like, it's okay if not everything is a museum, because there's other purposes for old houses, and even a lot of these historic houses that you go to, they were repurposed to, you know, boarding homes or like schools for like young girls or something before they become a museum. And so like it just because it was originally such and such purpose doesn't mean it always has to have a purpose in a community, which is really fascinating. And we're good at kind of problem solving and being scrappy with some of these objects or buildings and figuring out different uses with them over time that fit either the time, the community, whatever is needed.
Yeah.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
I can't remember. I think I was going to say something about historic house museums are also just like a monster compared to regular museums, like an average like modern building museum.
Oh,
It's
okay.
because they're really difficult to maintain correct temperature, humidity levels. They're often plagued with things like lead paint or arsenic covered wallpaper or a lot of kind of like timely things that are very difficult to deal with. There's entire textbooks on historic house museums that are just like completely separate because the house itself is not only housing the objects, but is an object. And so then it's just, again, writing that line between preservation and use. And yeah, historic house museums are also just a different beast altogether to fund and maintain. And yeah.
And only to get into it a little bit more, because I am fascinated by historic house museums. It is relevant to the conversation because the vast majority of them were founded in the 70s in the lead up to the bicentennial. And so there obviously was this need or this want to be like, it's a bicentennial. We need to preserve our history. What can our community do? Let's take that old house and make it a museum. And it's something you don't really see going on now that we're in the semi-quincentennial. And I don't know if we have, you know, our thing that we are replacing it with, but it is an interesting thing to see that it sort of culminated out of this centennial fervor. I thought you wanted to say something to that, Henry, but
I mean, yeah, I thought of something that may be irrelevant, because in reenacting, and this may not be irrelevant, because reenactment is responsible for so much general passion for some very niche historic objects. I'm sure every person who has a private or public collection of early objects has fielded questions from people putting together a reenactment impression. And, you know, like military reenactment units will go to museums to look at uniforms and things like this, reconstruct them. But so much reenactment of American history, even though there were earlier reenactments, so much of what we're familiar with from reenactors started in the 70s because of the bicentennial. And in many ways, we compare ourselves to that often and wonder, what are we exactly doing that's similar to the bicentennial? How are we doing it better? So that was pretty incoherent. But
It leads to this question: is what is the purpose of which we are doing? What is the purpose of preserving either this object, this building, or even this, in reenactment, this life,
even a hobby, right?
Yeah.
Why keep doing a hobby? Should we do it the same way that we started doing it decades ago?
And why is it more meaningful on these anniversaries? Is another question. Is it just because we are in general becoming more, retrospective of where we come from, or how we wish to remember where we come from? I find a lot of the ways, because again, a lot of this preservation is a choice. I know there's the neglect that we talked about, but these objects are being passed on purposefully, and a lot of the ones that we don't care about are going to end up in the privy pile. But we are making, even with the houses, we're making a choice on whose house is preserved.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what story we necessarily want to preserve for the future. And I'm always fascinated, especially with these anniversaries, finding out what are the stories that people are interested in. And people like to think history is like a very objective thing, and this is something we talk about on the podcast all the time. It is not. It's subjective. The stories that we choose to tell now are how either we want to be remembered or how we want the future to remember the past, which is really interesting. And I think like objects are such a cool like physical manifestation of that idea, that then museums become the holdings for these objects. And so we have this weird like push and pull between our past selves, our current selves, and then what we're hoping to then pass on to the future as a museum because of all of these objects.
Yeah. I think from what I've experienced and a lot of kind of the philosophy of museum creation that I've done a lot of research on, so much of it boils down to human connection, which like seems really obvious, but it's what I keep coming back to, what a lot of people keep coming back to, is just like, what are the day-to-day conversations that you're having? What are the reasons that we're taking in objects? When we're thinking about objects that we're taking into our collection, we're thinking about, do we know the story behind it? Do we know the history? What's the provenance? What was it used for? What could we use? What stories could we use to tell from it? And I think a lot of what is chosen to be preserved on a personal level, on a community level, just kind of comes down to those kinds of human connections, those personal connections, those stories that can tell. And like you said, it's not subjective. Like, just for a personal story, I have a collection of handmade quilts, and I'm sure this is a tried and true constant thing that people hear when talking about quilting and textile work, is like, my grandma, she was a quilter. Mm-hmm. She owned a quilt shop. I have her quilts, and my instinct is to protect and preserve them as well. But then there's not just the human connection, just because I want to maintain that connection to her, but it's also the use and the purpose of the object. So it's really that push and pull, because even just recently, my grandma came over to my house. I was showing her all the quilts that I had from her, and she noticed me put one of them up on a shelf in my closet, in my linen closet, and close it. And my grandpa noticed that too, and he goes, "Those things aren't meant to be on shelves." He was like, "Your grandma didn't make that for you so that you could put it on a shelf. You got to use it." And I had to show him. I'm like, "I put that one on a shelf. I have 2 of them that you handmade. They are on my bed right now, and I use them." But it's like my instinct was to preserve that because it has that human connection, but then she wants me to use them. And so then it's, how do I make that decision? I want these to stick around, but I want to have that connection now and later too.
Right. And we have so many struggles with what we preserve and what we choose to preserve, like you said. And in those ways, and at the same time, there's this other source of subjectivity in everything that we do, which is the people who preserved the objects that we have to look at and why they preserved them.
And had the ability to preserve them too.
Right. We only have them because somebody else preserved them.
Right. Yeah.
And we talked earlier about things that get preserved accidentally or unintentionally, or maybe because they weren't well made or for whatever reason they didn't get used up. But on the other hand, the things that were preserved because people put great stock in them. I know you visit a lot of museums, and you visit a very broad description of things you can call a museum.
Oh yeah.
And we've all seen collections, or as a collections manager, you're offered items for our collection that are very important to people, and that they put a lot of stock in the historic value, the intrinsic value of that thing. And frankly, some of us look at it and say that is completely uninteresting, or that
it breaks my heart.
it is. It's hard because that doesn't invalidate their personal connection to that object, and yet a personal connection to something that has a distinct story is one thing.
But then what?
But a assumption about the thing, or an ignorant interpretation of the thing. So many things have been preserved out of somebody's flawed understanding of that thing's history.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
This thing, this belonged to, how many of us have looked at something in a collection that says this is from the 18th century? We're like, it is not. Right?
That's true.
This
So
axe belonged to Tecumseh.
right.
This chair was sat in by Abraham Lincoln. Was it really?
Exactly.
Yeah.
This and 800
that
other chairs.
is one of the things that we get to evaluate as another generation when we look at what was preserved in the bicentennial. And the understanding people had of material culture at the time was incomplete. Ours is incomplete. We're just a little further along. We have wider access to resources.
Yeah.
But we have to evaluate what they collected, what they preserved, why they did, and whether it was worth preserving. And that's tricky because some of those things you preserve because it was collected, because it was preserved.
Yeah,
Because
you preserve it
that-
for the sake of keeping it
Exactly.
preserved because it was already preserved this long, so
Right.
you might as well
So
keep
that's
preserving it.
its modern story was that
Yeah.
it was held as a whatever. But then if you're somebody who thinks that your research and your knowledge is based off of material fact, which is a trap I fall into when I talk about preserving material culture, because it's evidence, because it's the physical truth of the past. And if we don't preserve it, how can we know the difference between interpretation, nostalgia, and reality? But how many of those things from the past were uncommon for their time, were misinterpreted in the past, and that misinterpretation was given to us. So that comment about history being very subjective is so permeating.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. Again, you bring up your collection. It's the things that we want to preserve. I think that's something that's unique for, at least somewhat, for the semi-quincentennial is Gen Z. We are being, given these generations worth collections, and we no longer have space. A lot of us live in apartments.
Yeah.
And so how can we take care of these, familiar heirlooms that, my great-great-grandma gave this to me? And how are you, if it doesn't serve a purpose in your house, or if it's a big issue is the china, the nice china that they put away, and now it's getting brought to you, but I eat everything on plastic plates. I don't need china.
Even as kids, we weren't allowed to eat off of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
I don't use
unless
mine
you
when
can
it's
afford a huge, display case for it, which no, that's where my Lego goes. And so then you run into the risk, or you run into the problem, and museums are seeing it. It's the museum's job to take care of these things now. And it's not, Gen Z. But I just think about all of the things my parents have that they have meaning in it. And in theory, I should have meaning in it, but I know I will never use it. I know that it will just kind of take up space. So what are we to do with these things? Sometimes we should, not everything needs to be preserved.
Yeah.
Is also the sad thing.
I always like to, when I'm kind of culling my personal collection, I think I've talked to you guys that at home I'm a purger. I just like to get rid of things a lot, which is very contrary to what I kind of do as a profession. But I think it kind of stands to reason of just what is the purpose of preservation? Why am I keeping this thing? And a similar thing to you is the women in my family have this collection of glass shoes, really intricately painted glass shoes. hundreds of them. And I remember when I was told that I might inherit this, I was like, where am I going to put this? And then my first thought is, oh, I guess when everyone who cares about it passes away, I could just sell them on eBay or give them to Goodwill. But then that kind of breaks my heart in a different way.
Right.
And a lot of the people who come to me with collections that they want to donate to us, it's always the same. I don't want them to end up in Goodwill. I don't want them to end up in the trash heap. And it's like, museums are running out of space too.
Yeah.
Museums are running out of funding. But museums aren't necessarily the only place that can preserve this stuff. Like, it can be preserved in a lot of different ways. I mean, there are antique enthusiasts all over the world that would take things off your hands, but it's just about finding that care within yourself, even if you can't, like, hold on to them or preserve them yourself, to be able to find that space for them. But also, maybe it comes down to picking and choosing the best of the best to preserve and being okay with sacrificing the rest,
Right.
which is an unfortunate thing, but yeah.
Yeah. So basically, if you're trying to get rid of a collection, be okay if the museum only takes like one or two of the good things. Actually,
Yeah.
I have an example. If you want to pass me Speedy up there. So my grandfather actually, he made a museum in his basement of Miles Lab things. The Speedy, Alka-Seltzer, made in Elkhart, Indiana. Shout out Elkhart, Indiana. And so he worked there, and in his basement he created his own museum, and that obviously became an issue. And so we did try and like, here's the entire collection, museum, please take it. And Elkhart just doesn't have the capacity for this huge collection. Even though Miles Lab is super important to the development of the city. And so, yeah, we ended up donating it to a couple of different places, and it is really cool to see like those pieces come back up. But yeah, it's those things.
Yeah.
That's true. You called us out for being Gen Z and having our own unique challenges, and that's I study antique furniture in a lot of different ways because I don't always have personal access to museum collections in a way that I can materially learn. We talked about looking at things more closely. You can't always do that on a collections website.
Right.
And so when I study antique furniture to understand my trade, sometimes it means collecting. Sometimes it means haunting flea markets and antique malls and not buying anything. Sometimes it means
taking a picture.
I've only been kicked out once, but
Oh wow, I kind of want to hear about that story.
another time maybe. But that's something that when I'm in, for instance, Facebook groups are a great source of knowledge.
Yeah.
Where people of older generations come together and share their appreciation, their knowledge. But there is a very common phrase in Facebook groups around antique furniture collecting and antique collecting in general, which is that younger generations just don't appreciate these things.
Yeah.
And the prices have gone down. I remember when I bought this, I paid, $1,000 or many hundreds of dollars for it. And now I just bought one of these for $50. And what a shame.
Yeah.
They see the value dropping on the market of certain things. And they see us not collecting it, not inheriting it. And that is a source of distress to a lot of people of older generations because of the value they place on these things. And because they put that value on the things that were inherited by them from previous generations. And because for many of them, that's been their livelihood, is collecting and dealing antiques.
Yeah.
And so they perceive the value of these things dropping. And I think the reality is a lot of us recognize that intrinsic value deeply. And like you said, and like you also said, it's just so hard for us to act on that in the same ways that previous generations have. When it comes to collecting antique tools, which I did for a long time, even before coming here, that's how I built up my working kit.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't afford collector quality tools. I couldn't afford professional quality new tools. And so it meant collecting old tools. And the fact is, I appreciate and I'm so excited by the rare and the beautiful and the collectible and the historically significant. But I only have room for tools that I can sharpen and put to use.
Yeah.
Which we had that whole discussion about the ethics and the struggles of that. So in a lot of cases, I could pass up all kinds of things that, if I could buy this Indiana cabinet maker's tool chest, which of course now I would be, potentially it could make its way into Connor Prairie's collection through me. And those are things that could happen. But the fact is, if I'm looking at that on the shelf, I can only really think, well, I need one of these and I can afford maybe that one, but the rest of these I'll just have to leave to fate.
Yeah. I think a lot of older generations will attribute kind of a lack of preservation and younger generations to apathy when it's not.
Right.
It's not. We all have the
access.
same. It's access. Yeah. It's a lot of us have the exact same passion, the exact same drive that older generations have, and that same desire to preserve. But we just can't. We don't have the tools to do it. So a lot of it that I really like doing is giving people those tools and that knowledge of how to do that properly. Too, and just learning about it myself and you learning about it as well, and just preserving this kind of like lost art. But it's not really a lost art. It's just a question of like, what can we do?
Yeah. It's also interesting that they see often, because the monetary value of something goes down, that also means its intrinsic value is going down, which isn't also the case. We just maybe don't have the means of paying that high price, and so when it comes down, and also should say, just because a different generation doesn't value something doesn't mean you can't still value it. That's kind of the beauty of a lot of these objects. If you are gifted something that is handmade from someone, you have a lot more value than like someone random. Like it doesn't transfer one to one, and museums have this weird job of trying to filter through all of that and figure out, what is actually worth it. The one thing that, and this might have already been a podcast all into itself, is that it is subjective in other ways where certain objects aren't preserved because the community the object comes from doesn't have the means to preserve it, or the community it comes from, the object was, already either bought or taken from that community, and it is now somewhere else. And that is, I think, also an important thing when we are making choices of what to preserve, is sometimes we have to fill in those blanks for these, these places that objects might not be.
Yeah. That reminds me, it's not really American history focused, it's more European history, but there's just a fun tidbit, and you can cut this out if you want, but there's a museum in Greece near the Acropolis where the statues from the Parthenon would be if they were not in the British Museum.
Right.
And just thinking about like how there's this, and that's a newer thing too. It's just this newer aspect of like preserving the spaces where those objects would be too. Is just another aspect of like preservation. I don't know if that's relevant, but
again, no, it totally is, and it speaks again to telling the story of absence. Like, there's a reason why there are blanks in the historical record.
Yeah.
Some will never know. Others are sitting in another museum.
Right.
Yeah, and
Right.
that's all about like kind of folding these in about the preservation not only of the object itself, but of the story that it told too.
Yeah, and that is something. Oh, go ahead.
I just said that was deep.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I appreciate with the semi-quincentennial is we are looking at, how do we preserve as diverse of stories as possible? It's not just the important things. And this is something Connor Prairie has kind of done for a while, is we want the ubiquitous. We want the everyday. We want not necessarily who's the big man of history. We want what is just our normal tool look like, and how is it used? And so something that's why I keep coming back to Connor Prairie. But
That's a really fascinating thread, because when you talk about the difference between how people celebrated the bicentennial through reenactment and collecting and
Preserving those
preserving
houses.
artifacts and buildings, recreating historic skills, so much of it, not exclusively, and there were always people who were interested in the mundane and in the ordinary, but so much of it was, so many people were very drawn to very glorious aspects of history.
Yeah.
Military reenactment was such a huge aspect of the hobby compared to today, and especially younger generations who are getting into reenacting are much more likely to get involved in reenactment of domestic skills and trades and ordinary civilian life. That is much more prevalent with younger generations of reenactors. And similarly, even in hand tool woodworking, there are so many more people who are interested in the folk furniture and the vernacular furniture of the past compared to older generations of woodworkers who made historical furniture, recreated these keystone pieces of American period furniture. And so some of those priorities have changed, and places like Conner Prairie were
pioneers of that.
In looking for those gaps. Looking in the holes and trying to fill them with experimentation and exploration.
Yeah. I wonder if that comes from a we've kind of done it to death aspect of like the reenactments, or if it's more of a shift. If it's more of like a shift of like focus, or it's probably a combination of both.
Right.
But yeah, that is interesting that I have noticed that a lot of younger generations are like wanting to learn more about the day to day. And I think we've had this really long history of, like you said, glorifying these like big moments, especially all of the preservation surrounding America's founding. And then kind of brushing aside the rest of the 250 years of America's history, which has just as much of an impact on our overall culture and the objects that we still have and preserve today. And it's just interesting that a lot of different generations have these sort of like zeroed in on certain moments, and then our generation is sort of more branching out into the blanket overall day-to-day life, like what it would have been like.
Yeah, we like to see ourselves in history.
Yeah,
we do. And like with collecting, it's a different aspect. It's a different expression of the same passions, of the same things. A lot of it is very patriotic, even though it's not fifes and drums and flags. It's we express patriotism in different ways. We express a desire to connect with our predecessors and our ancestors and our neighborhoods and places in different ways. And a lot of that is because of new history that we've learned growing up and better understandings of history that we were able to learn. A lot of it is different social attitudes, and a lot of it is because people have done all those things and we're curious.
Yeah. We
could I could pick up a manual, or I could go in a Facebook group or a online forum, and I could just ingest endless information on historical battles and great houses and great pieces of furniture. And I could look at all of the reproductions that other people have made.
Yeah.
It's so much more exciting as a student and as a maker to look at things, and I'm sure as a collector, as a researcher, as a preservationist of any kind, to look at things that have not been that are not so widely known and haven't been so deeply explored. It's like we're looking for new frontiers of craft exploration and of research exploration. And for many of us, those are our own stories that weren't included in those stories in the past. And for others of us, it's aspects of those stories that weren't covered. But it's very exciting to see. And it's not different in spirit from what was done in the past.
Yeah.
It's not a rejection of it. It's a continuation of it.
Exactly. Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah. Kids still care.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that it's that really hit me this past semester. Me and Abby took 15 kids into our collections vault where we keep our all of our objects, and they were fascinated. And not only were they just fascinated with the objects, immediately they were riddling off all of the objects that are important to them. And so this isn't something that's gonna go away.
No.
Each generation they still care about what other generations have done in the past. We just, it's going to look different. We're going to have different priorities. And I think that's fine.
Yeah. I think it would be really cool to see in another 50 years what museums look like and what's being preserved and what from our generation is going to be kept around, and how future generations are going to choose to preserve certain aspects of their own culture and then our culture and things like that. I think it would be really cool to see that evolution.
I hope we all are able to be like so many people who've encouraged me and taught me things from older generations who were excited to see it.
Yes.
But it would be so much fun to see myself
As
50
a
years from now
crotchety old
saying, oh, nobody cares about this stuff anymore. Where's everyone
Where's
who's...
the antique
What do I do
furniture?
with all these tools?
As soon as Lego is just like not popular anymore, I'm sure I'll be like, but my Lego collection.
Oh man, what an awful future if Lego was
I'll be sad to see Lego go.
Me too. Speaking of Lego and fun things, I'm going to spring a fun surprise on y'all.
Okay.
So here at Beyond the Revolution, actually, you know what? Pause. Cue the
The
music.
natural curiosity of youth.
All right. So don't worry. That's for
be
editing
a
room. That's for post. That's for editing room Easton to know and y'all to hear later on. But it's a good music. So we're gonna do the Joy Corner.
Okay.
The Joy Corner here at Beyond the Revolution essentially involves us asking y'all a fun question and then a slightly more serious fun question.
Okay.
And this one is actually a really good one that Ryan is currently adding something to.
No.
That's not part of the Joy
I know.
Corner.
You have to
just
have
wanna
joy.
That's true.
There you go. Sorry.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we're going to ask y'all a quick, fun little two-part question. This one, they're kind of like lumped together, so it's like a fun and a
Serious.
serious answer to a fun question. But today's Joy Corner question is... Thank you. Thank you, Abby. If you could overnight add something to Connor Prairie, what would it be? So like one fun and one serious.
I feel like you'll have a lot more opinions.
Well, do y'all
on that
need
than I
need time to think? Because
Just a little bit of
I
time.
was gonna say, I could guess
It's
maybe
more
for
like time
Henry.
to narrow down.
yes, narrow it
Yeah.
down.
someone's asked me that question before, and I was just flabbergasted. You got something?
I have one.
All right, you go
Oh,
ahead.
Come
I
on,
have
Henry,
one.
cook.
As somebody who tries to recreate experiences, and I try to recreate the experiences of craftspeople making certain things and following certain processes, and I try to recreate those sounds and sights and smells and textures for people who visit my shop. Something that none of us have ever been able to see, who are sitting here in this room or who are involved in museums right now. I doubt anybody has been able to experience this, is an active shop with people of a wide range of ages producing historical artifacts. If I could create a brand new, unique living history experience, it would be
It's like a new historic building.
it would be a 19th century furniture factory.
Oh.
The technology is the same as the shop that we have on the grounds. But when people walk into that shop, the picture they have in their head is of the village cabinet maker carefully, slowly building these beautiful things for his family and his neighbors. When a reality in many early Indiana communities, as furniture manufacturing and wood manufacturing has always been a huge part of our history and a huge part of our economy, were furniture factories. In the 1830s, we had chair factories that were churning out hundreds of chairs at a time with not that many people by hand using 19th century tools and technology. And if I could have a woodworking classroom where people could participate and explore craft and learn how to use the tools and experience even more of those sights and sounds and smells, including younger people, could step into the role of an apprentice.
That'd be
And
cute.
they could be exposed to things like the smell of hide glue and, the responsibility of keeping it stirred and sweeping the shavings from the floor and things like this. So if I could create a program or an experience that was sort of an apprentice for a day experience for people of any age. That is something I've always wanted to experience and see myself, is what is it like to be in a busy, full shop with a row of workbenches with kids running around. Maybe that poses some logistical and safety risks, but
I don't know. Partner with a high school home ec class.
exactly.
Yeah.
Bring shop class into the 19th century. It's a living history experience. It's a recreation of something that challenges our expectation of historical woodworking.
Yeah.
Do they even have home ec classes
I
anymore?
hope so.
Barely.
I'm
I
not
didn't
going
at
to.
my high school.
I don't know about home ec. They have some types of shop classes at
Okay.
some schools.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
I
Perhaps
just said that
back in
because
the
then
Sorry,
they have
that
just
was
like a
a-
little inkling of how to use a saw.
yeah, absolutely.
But then you get that history aspect, which So is that your fun or practical one?
That's
I thought
it's
the
still
factory-
educational.
The
It's still
factory
educational.
fun?
Well, they're not going to be very productive. That's just not going to work out. That's a fun one. That is a educational but fun idea. Is to be an apprentice for a day. Apprentices don't have the skills from years of experience. They don't have the knowledge of a trained cabinet maker. So whatever age somebody was who wanted to sign up and participate in this, they're helping. They get to stand at the elbow of a experienced woodworker. Ideally, there would be several in the shop working at benches, and they get to handle the tools and try them out. They get to learn some of the processes and learn about the materials and how to pick the wood and things like this. And it would create. I can recreate the smell of the glue or the finish and the sound of the plane and the sight of the axe, throwing chips across the shop. I can't recreate that multiplied by many workers all at once.
And the guests being a part of it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. I can't tell if the one I came up with one. I can't tell if I want it to be the fun one or the practical one because I think it'd be cool either way. But you've talked about it. But ever since I went to that IHS lecture on the printing press, I want a printing press here. I think it would be so cool. Not only because of just like the historic significance, because I've been nerding out about the printing press ever since I went to that lecture. So thank you for making me go to that.
Well done.
But just from my own hobby of like loving like reading and books and literary stuff, so being able to have like fresh printed books from the time period or newspapers or anything, that would be so cool. Because at one point I wanted to be a journalist, and it's just like it would combine a lot of my fun interests and hobbies, and like having just that aspect and seeing it be done. But then of course we would probably have to have like a printing press workshop, and then be a whole thing.
Well, we have built 2 historic wood shops and furnished them with a lot of complex machinery made here at Connor Prairie by our blacksmiths and woodworkers.
I would go out there and I'd typeset
your
every
budget.
morning.
I mean,
I'll just like write up little short stories and then typeset them at 5 a.m. and then
oh yeah, a Prairie Town newspaper would be really cool.
I'd be so cute.
Yeah,
You
what?
could advertise for the Literary Society.
A Prairie Town newspaper, reproductions of broadsides and advertisements from the period, printed on letterpress. We could collaborate with local artists who were letterpress printers.
See, I think that's very practical.
This is fantastic.
let the Prairie Town mailman go around and
Yes.
deliver it.
There you
Yes.
go. You have totally impractical, really ridiculous,
We're gonna
dangerous, fun
conspire
idea,
behind the
and then a
scenes.
very practical
Yeah.
idea that is also extremely fun and exciting.
Yeah, we can conspire behind the scenes, and then we'll just, just pitch for it, and then
That's what the apprentices are helping build.
yes,
The printing press
exactly.
Oh wow.
print shop.
Yeah.
I love
Values
this.
3 proposal.
Yeah, that would be so fun. I guess my fun one would be, I don't know, because we're collecting from later,
Oh, yeah.
like a little bit later. I like that sort of time period. I'm more interested, I guess, and more knowledgeable for like the 20th century time period. I'd probably like to see something like music from that time period, especially like the 20s. I love jazz and like swing. Oh, it's so incredible. And I know we already have a phonograph, an Edison phonograph, but like more things like that where you can just, I would love to have like.
Why not just have a big band?
Well, the thing is like I feel like it would be so
Prairie
cool
Town Ramblers.
if we did like swing dancing or like had little like hop something. And I know it's like more like later, but yeah, I would just like to see some more music aspects from like the 20s because I feel like it just created a whole renaissance of like music creation in that time period. So that would be my fun one. I would just love that. Yeah. You just drag the phonograph out. I think that's in the educational resource collection.
I do have
That
a
would be
practical
fun.
one.
Yeah.
I thought of a practical one, which nobody needs a recreated furniture factory from the 19th century. And realistically, a lot of the things going on in those shops were not healthy
Never
for
say
anybody
no
involved.
one. Somebody needs.
Well, but if I could add something practical that would further our educational mission, if I could use Prairie Town and our historic buildings as a classroom for historic preservation methods and techniques, alongside our collection, other artifacts in our collection, if we could teach artifact conservation and furniture repair in ways that keep both intrinsic and practical pieces of furniture protected or in use in people's lives, so that we can conserve and care for some of those things that get handed down to us that we're fortunate enough to steward. If I could teach people how to do basic maintenance on homes that are made out of materials that can be processed with hand tools, it's not necessarily accessible to work on a lot of modern buildings without appropriate equipment. But if you live in a house that's made of wood, there are cheap tools that you can get, and there are skills that used to be much more common that if I could use the built environment that we have that is already being constantly worked on, is already preserved for a unique purpose, for a different purpose than most historic structures, then I would take advantage of that constant need for work being done on the buildings. And I take advantage of the skills that we have here in so many of our historic tradespeople to maintain those things and to repair those things. And I'd share them with people who could maintain their homes, who could preserve historic structures independently for continuing use, and teach people skills that gave them agency over their own built environment, over their own objects that surround them, to repair and reuse things, with all of the modern shops and the tools and the buildings and the work that needs done all the time. That's what I would add if I could.
You took the Joy Corner and you tied it back to the premise of the episode, which is like, how do you take these things and build community with it? And that's such a cool place because like repairing and all of, if you have the skills, you're keeping it local. You can help your neighbor, you can teach your neighbor, and suddenly you create such a stronger community. So that's incredible. Nice job tying it back to the rest of the episode.
And how are we going to reach all these people to tell them about classes? With printed material.
Our printing press. Let's go.
Amazing.
Ryan, do you want to go next?
I will, but man, that's gonna be hard to follow up. I'll start with my fun thing, and this is not actually my idea. This is somebody's idea at Connor Prairie a long time ago, and I love it as a bit. If you look at old Prairie Town maps when they were trying to plan Prairie Town, someone somewhere wrote, "There's gonna be a bison area." And we're just going to have bison roaming where right now I think is a parking lot. And I think
Just have bison
this is
back.
the reason why this isn't practical is we don't have nearly enough space at Connor Prairie on this side of the property to just have wild bison.
The space is why you think it's impractical?
There were
From
no
an education-
bison in Indiana in the 1830s.
Oh.
All the big game was gone.
The space.
I think the space is probably we could do it.
But Ryan, there's an entire
We have a balloon.
But there's an entire subsection of national park content that is devoted to tourists messing with bison and almost getting killed.
Yeah, no, we wouldn't let people near them. We do something like Kankakee, which, by the way, go see the bison at Kankakee. They have plenty of space for them. But I think it'd be great to have some bison.
Hey, the logs haven't eaten anybody in years.
That's true.
That's my fun thing. I think it'd be great.
At least a few.
Shout out Ag Team
Yeah.
for
Bring
keeping our guests safe from our animals and our animals safe from our guests.
Yes. Shout out of the day goes to the ag team.
My practical thing is also kind of a fun thing. I want to train.
I literally thought about saying train.
Train. Like,
So like
it wouldn't
the-
necessarily
like the
fit for
zoo?
a town.
An engine or like a car? Or both?
A horse-drawn train, like
Oh.
the first one down in Madison, Indiana. In
I
18
do think it should be something that could be used, like we've been talking about. If we have it, it should
back
be
and
used for a
forth.
purpose beyond educational. It should be able to be actually used. I mean, we just have such a large grounds.
Like the Kings Island train.
Just
that
connect
takes
us
you
to
from
Noblesville's historic rail line, the nickel plate line.
Nickel plate line. There's the Hoosier Valley. Yes.
I think that's turning into a trail. I mean, it has turned into a trail, that line.
Not the whole thing. They're running trains on parts of it.
Yeah.
Still?
They are. You can go ride a train up in Noblesville.
You can ride a bike.
You can also
railway.
pedal a
Yeah.
bike car on. Yeah.
It's
That's cool.
New
Yeah.
date idea.
Yeah.
yeah, I think a train would be fun, and it would fit with our themes. I also was thinking about could we have a canal half built? I think that would also be a very interesting interpretive tool.
We could build flat boats. We could.
We could
interpret
turn the
a
train into the Polar Express for Mary Prairie.
That's probably a copyright issue.
Wow.
But
I have
I
a
did
lot
not
of
think of
practical
this.
ideas.
I did not think
The
of the
off-brand
scale
Polar
when
Express.
I didn't think of
I'm
the scale
for
when
trains.
I
I mean, the other thing also, and I will say this only because it shows up on an old Conner Prairie map too, is the idea of a grist mill because we are right on the river.
with a sawmill.
Yeah. Oh, sure. I didn't think about the sawmill, but yeah, so some sort of mill because we're on the river. Why aren't we not interpreting it other than mills are, I'm assuming, costly? So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. What are yours?
Those are good.
Okay.
I'm pro mill. Big fan of the mill idea.
Pro
Okay.
train.
Pro train, pro mill, pro printing press.
By the way, we don't have the power to make any of these happen.
No, we don't. We are but for few.
Yet.
Yeah. We're working on that, but okay. So for the practical one, now let's do the fun one first. So the fun one. So okay, balloons. Ballooning has come to America in 1790 something. Someone wrote
Ben
a balloon.
Franklin saw a balloon. Yeah.
Someone wrote a balloon in Philadelphia. I was just doing research on it. Yes, we do have a balloon, a manned balloon. But what about Prairie 1836 specific, because it's happened in America before. You take an unmanned balloon, like a scientific 1836 style cloth or whatever balloon, and come out in Prairie Town daily, and they just launch one for fun. Just every day you launch a balloon. Make it out of biodegradable material, obviously.
Okay.
And then just launch it and just let it go do its thing.
And then we hear about a traffic accident on 465.
Listen, I'm not saying that this has not gone poorly. Even historically, the entire village of Tullamore burned down because of this. That's where Tullamore Dew comes from.
Because of a balloon?
Yeah, a hot air balloon crashed into a chimney and burnt it all down. And
Why are you... I'm just kidding.
No, because
Okay,
our
it's a
buildings
good
are
idea.
not. Listen, our buildings are not as densely packed. No one died, by the way. And also, we can do this.
I'm surprised you're not advocating for a dirigible.
We'll see.
I love the balloon idea, but you just said buildings burning down and then mentioned our buildings in quick succession, and I can only think about how I've never had to deal with fire damage yet.
I'm gonna have to edit out all that knocking. Thanks for Henry. Yeah, I didn't poo-poo on your fun idea, and here you
No,
come.
I think that's good.
Your
I
idea is
like
more
it.
fun than my fun idea. Mine involves labor,
Listen, all I'm saying
child
is,
labor.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it would be
That was
kind
pretty
of
rampant
fun.
back then. It's okay.
It'd be kind of fun. When did they let up the balloon? I mean, I do like dirigibles, but that's outside of our scope. Dirigibles weren't a thing back then in 1836, but balloons were. Word to John Wise. Now, speaking of wise things, the practical one, I think around Headless Horseman time, we should do a Prairie Town murder mystery.
Fantastic.
Just
Wait,
have
don't we already do ghost tours?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Very small.
But
yeah.
have the interpreters actually go out
in Prairie Town.
in Prairie Town, and someone has been murdered. We have the funeral stuff already. Someone's been murdered. The casket's over there. Spread out a bunch of random clues. Some don't lead to anything, and others lead to something huge. And just open it up during Headless Horseman time. Let the kids run around and ask questions. Everyone's acting suspicious, and have like it be a whodunit, and just change whodunit and how they done it every single day. And just have it be a fun thing for people to do around Headless time. Connor Prairie murder mystery. It would take like. It wouldn't take a lot.
This is
to
good.
like
It
change
turns into a historical artifact scavenger hunt.
Yeah.
Something
Mr.
like- yeah.
Campbell in the
It's-
kitchen
exactly.
with an amputation saw.
Could be. Maybe next
A little
day.
clue reference for you.
Yeah, see, there you go. See, I just feel like it would be cool. And like getting people more, because, you know, some people don't like to talk to our interpreters. They're a little bit
Yeah.
nervous. Be
That's
like,
true, but if they can accuse them of murder, then
Yeah.
I think that-
They'll be less nervous if
Yeah.
they know one of us is a killer.
yeah, that's so true.
Walk
I
in-
actually really like that idea.
thank you.
It gives them a purpose and
Yes.
a quest to be in the town. Yes.
Yeah.
And Henry's acting all suspicious in the carpenter shop.
Oh,
It's
To
You
like-
those
have a
who know-
lot of tools that you could use as a murder
This
weapon.
does sound like a variation on the old adventure cart, which I never experienced myself. But some of you guests, former guests and former staff remember.
Where you had a roll in.
Yeah. So this just sounds like the adventure cart gone deliciously wrong.
Well, I don't know what an adventure cart is. All I know is that I'm appreciative for a spectacular Joy Corner. And if nobody got me, I know Abby got me. Great.
I do like the balloons. We just have to launch them when the wind's blowing away from Prairie Town.
What are the odds?
We
What are the
also
odds it's
have
gonna
to make
hit
sure
a Prairie
it
Town
doesn't
building?
go like in the cross stream of like our actual balloon too and cause issues.
Oh
with
crap!
that.
I didn't think about that. We'll do it on days when the balloon's not flying.
That'll be safe.
Abnormal behavior. It's smart. It's thrilling. It provides kick.
I'm having a lot of fun.
This is great, and thank
I
you.
have
didn't
anywhere
even,
to be.
I had a lot of stories too. I didn't get to tell.
I
and
know.
was
God, we
like-
could do this for days, couldn't we?
Yeah. Start a whole new podcast. You and I can start a new podcast.
There you
about
go.
It.
Oh my gosh, we created an offshoot podcast, Ryan.
Connor Prairie
Here we
podcast
go.
spin-off.
Yeah. I would listen to
Just-
that all day.
Just waxing poetic about
I know.
preservation.
I never got to be in any of the object videos.
Waxing poetic with Henry and Abby.
There you go. Waxing poetic. The thumbnail is me polishing a piece of furniture.
Yeah, I was about to be like, you can wax something.
Henry and Abby, thank you all so much. I do want to ask the question we ask all of our guests. What is your hope for the future? I just need to check to make sure we didn't change the wording.
And this can be anything. This can be what we talked about today, just in general. We leave it open.
I hope that future generations can have the tools and the resources that they need to still preserve the things that are important to them and important to their communities, and that we don't lack the education or the desire, I guess, to continue preserving our history and telling our stories among ourselves, and understanding a need that need to preserve what we have so that it can inform our future as well.
I don't think I possibly could have put it better. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I hope that in all of our jobs as museum professionals of many different kinds, I hope we keep finding a way forward to bring every kind of person into the act of preserving all of our histories, our shared histories, our unique histories. I hope that my skills will always be useful to help other people gain those tools and those skills to preserve their own history and stories that I can't tell, that I can't preserve. I hope that I am always able to help keep these things around for people to learn from and to use for their stories, for other people's stories. And
Wow, that was fantastic, both of you. Y'all tore that question up.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for being on the podcast today. It's been a fun one.
thanks for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
I do want to give a couple of shout outs. First off, if you have enjoyed the conversation about preservation, especially like what is worth preserving in a town and sort of what does that add or subtract to a town, we did recently have a speaker, and it will be on YouTube eventually. It's called History of Historic Preservation, but it's really about talking. He talks about what downtowns kind of need to survive and revitalize, and a lot of it is this history, and talking about the context around, especially here where we have a lot of towns that are revitalizing or just completely developing out of nowhere. And that was JP Hall from Ball State, so be on the lookout for when that is released on YouTube. And then if you are interested in any of these historic trades that Henry keeps talking about, do you want to talk about how they can learn more?
Absolutely. We do not have a reconstructed 19th century sweatshop. However,
Something close.
You can join us in our modern shop behind the scenes, in our blacksmith shop, our textile studio, our pottery shop, and sometimes even on the grounds, closely with our domestic skills people and our historic interpreters and our ag people all across the board. We have classes for everything from crafts that you can take home with you to skills that you can bring into your home and your lifestyle. And we're always adding more. They're listed on our website, and sometimes you'll see them on social media.
Yeah. And while you can, interact with a lot of objects out on the grounds, Abby, do you want to talk about the program that we just started?
Yeah, I was just about to say, we just started a brand new program called Off the Shelf Conversations with Collection Staff. So take a look at our website when it's happening. Usually it's on Tuesdays. And a collection staff member, whether that be myself or a curator, will usually be out with a collections object or something related to our collections. And you can feel free to just pick our brains about collections management, preservation, the history behind these objects, things like that, just to kind of get the work that I do out into general public as well.
I didn't even talk about a ball jar this entire podcast.
You just did it now, so you managed to sneak it in there at the buzzer. Proud of you.
Tune in to our spin-off podcast.
our second
follow-up.
Our second spin-off podcast, the Ball Jar Corner. But thank y'all. This was a lot of fun. Is it out? It's outro time, right? Okay.
You usually do a shout out though, don't you?
Oh, shout out we shouted out ag staff. Also, shout out Rena.
Yes, Rena, our archivist. She works with me in the collection. She cares for all of Conner Prairie's archival documents related to the history of Conner Prairie. So you'll see her in the conservation studio as well. And she's just as excited about this type of preservation work that we do. She's great.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. She's been on the podcast before, too.
Yeah.
I promised her at lunch that I would shout her out. She cannot be forgotten.
That is a great episode to go back to if you are more curious about like what objects should be in museums and what maybe shouldn't be in museums.
Mm-hmm. This is reclamation, right? This is problematic.
Yeah.
Gosh, this is reclamation. It's turning into the middle child, and I don't like it. Anyway, yes, absolutely. Go check that one out. And thank y'all so much for listening. Be sure to catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, we will be there. And until next time.